explore the new world of virtual work. They're going to tell us about new research into the new world of virtual work and report on the hypothesis that virtual work enhances and not detracts from the value and performance of organisations. I'd like to welcome on stage, please, Philip Ross, the Chief Executive and founders of Cordless Group and Unwork, and Kurt Mcronz of Regis. Round of applause, please.
Graham, thank you, and good morning. And I think the idea of this next session is to show you some research which hopefully does predict the future. And we want to look at the future of work, but what I want to share with you today is the overlaps. These are familiar circles of people and place and technology, but where they overlap, I think, is where the real ingredients for change come from. And to kind of get us to this stage of predicting V-work, this future, we built on some research we did the previous year, also with Regis, looking at agility at work, trying to understand the 6 forces here that are reshaping the world of work. Now, to get to this vision of the future, we did 2 things. We were lucky to be able to take 20 people to a chateau in the south of France. And these people from around the globe controlled a staggering 243 million square feet of offices. And we asked them some fundamental questions about what they think will be the future. 1 or 2 in the audience. We then also surveyed globally about 600 people. And the results are published in this new report called V-work, which if you haven't got, you can grab a copy from the Regis stand outside. And in V-work, we tried to create this idea of the 3 Vs, the idea that virtual, advantage, and value were the 3 driving trends that we could identify for the future. And virtual, of course, is technology-led. It's about what we've heard this morning. Where are we working? Where are we heading? Advantage is what will happen and what will businesses take from this, how they can monetize will then be the value side of this. How can we get a bottom line figure for this concept of agility? And Kurt will talk to that. But I'll talk about the first 2 Vs with you. And virtual really is a trend that you've heard a lot about, but we think is going to iterate and go into its next incarnation in the next few years. And in the global survey, we found frontally that of the larger organizations that responded and we talked to, most people still commute into an office, 4 or 5 days a week. That's the majority of the work patterns today globally, and that was across all regions we found. And frontally, for large companies, very few people are home workers. And this is not people who occasionally work from home. This is people who are fundamentally based at home, still only 1.6%. So that hasn't really taken off for big organizations. The United Nations figures, I think, are the most worrying when you begin to predict the future. This is global population heading towards 9 billion by 2030, not that far away. But the lines, the blue and the red lines crossing this year is the frightening inflection point, because from now onwards, more people globally live in cities than outside cities. And that's never happened before. So our urban populations are now the dominating force. And as you've heard from Norman Baker this morning, how does that impact cities and transport? Every city that we looked at globally has the same patterns of transport, a huge blip in the morning of inward commuting to the center of cities and a smaller one at the end of the day. And transport can't cope with that. If cities grow in line with the United Nations figures, we think cities will become immobile. And for those that do travel and go to São Paulo or Beijing or Delhi or Mumbai, even worse, you know that it's almost impossible today to move around Mumbai by car. So how does this work? And I'm hoping that Steve Norris in his session will kind of challenge this notion of commuting and whether we can change it. But we asked, quite interestingly, what does the commute look like? And for most people, it's 41 minutes or more a day. And an hour and more was a kind of and also a kind of much answered figure. So a lot of downtime getting into this building in the center of a city. Interestingly, though, we asked people, would you like to work from home? But only 12% said yes. Most people actually want to commute, but they want a short commute from our research. And all this is in the report. The ideal commute is somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. People want to leave the home, but they want to stay in their community by and large. And what we found in the research, which perhaps is this future gaze, is there's nowhere to go, really. I mean, there is no professional workplace on offer 10 minutes away from most people's homes today. There's nowhere that people can take seriously as a place of work. So one of our predictions is kind of work in the community in a very different guise going forwards globally. The technology, I think, which will lead this kind of charge you know about, the cloud is going to be phenomenal. It's just happening. Microsoft launching 365 a few weeks ago is the impetus that we think we need to get everything into the cloud. And The Economist here predicts this evaporating computer, which I think David kind of talked to. And you know, the infrastructure being built by Google, by Microsoft, by Cisco and the others is staggering. This billion-dollar data center delivering applications to future devices will be part of this kind of equation that we think will develop this idea of a thin building. Because for those here in property, the idea of accommodating or housing technology, we think will be at an end. We don't believe that any servers will be housed in buildings in the future. And therefore all the cooling and the suppression for fire and the power and the resilience and the voids, the complexity of buildings we think can be removed in 5–10 years' time, and we head to this idea of a thin building, back to simplicity. All of this can go. You don't need it in the basements or elsewhere in your building. It doesn't need to be cooled. And that's a big change, because property for the last 30 years has accommodated highly complex, highly critical equipment. You kind of see the future when you go to some of the offices I visit, you know, people being agile, jumping into meetings with tablets or laptops, connecting via video, being fairly adept at kind of carrying this, which then removes paper. And the number of boards and directors now carrying these devices is staggering as you go around business. And what excites me more is when you look at Microsoft's vision for Windows 8, which I hope I'm allowed to show, but we'll see. The idea of tiles that will come next year, to me also say that we're going to blur the boundaries of distinctive work types. No more Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint or Word, but just a blurring of how we work and the ways in which we work. And to give you this kind of vision for the future, I want to show you just a few minutes of a new vision film made by Microsoft out of their labs in Seattle, which will give you a flavor, I think, for where things are going to head. You can run the video.
Benaderen die brandsteen Joubakkie Zone geskerp. Uw aandag asseblief. Welcome to Johannesburg International Airport. Please approach the road to create your pickup zone.
of that's available from the website, and you can kind of go onto our, the WorkTech website and get the rest of that. So what we're seeing, we think, is this kind of idea of the permeable city. You know, the idea that we have intelligence with people, which links to transport, which links to information, and so on. And that changes, we think, the nature of work, where work can be done. We're hearing from people that pathological collaboration is what's needed to replace management by supervision. So this idea of trust gets replaced by an idea of ours called the jelly bean, where people and their real-time presence appear as a jelly bean against their name, regardless of what you're looking at. And you can begin to see who's connecting to who in real time. So we're feeling that we're at this kind of inflection point. People are saying to us that the technology is now ready to go anywhere. And again, this is all in the research that you can have a look at. So virtual, we think, will actually accelerate this idea of V-work. It'll take us in a different direction. And it works on the ability that social networking heads in a different direction. You know, work becomes a verb, something that just we do, not a place that we have to go. And what I find interesting, though, is there are some issues with this. It's not this kind of brave new world. What I want to show you is two opposing views. Gupta, who many of you will know, INSEAD, and kind of one of the great management theorists at the moment, just says that the HQ will vanish. You know, offices are gone. It's just work about, you know, look at networks and social networks. But then Johnson, also a really interesting writer, who's got this great new book called Where Good Ideas Come From, says actually no, you know, innovation comes from what he calls the adjacent possible. You still need human beings together. And how does that work in an era of flexible working where Fred comes in on Monday but then isn't in on Tuesday when John is in there? Here they should work together, but they're appearing on different days. How in the future do we get in adjacent possible with energy happening when people are kind of fragmented and atomized? So we looked at where companies would seek advantage in all this. You know, we surveyed a range of kind of business drivers with a view to trying to kind of get a figure for agility to monetize it, which Kurt will talk to. And again, I won't go through the detail. This is all in the report, and you can read it later. But the key one is people. You know, everyone wants to kind of improve the performance of people. And you won't be surprised to hear that when we asked you know, the current leaders in organizations, will the next generation be different? Their view is, of course, it will. You know, 80% or 70% here saying that the people at school still, yet to come into the workforce, will reject the traditional method of working. And only very few saying, no, they won't, they'll carry on as we are today. And we now have a lab being built in a big school in London, and we're finding initially the same results. You know, the kids learning today are using technology that most corporates are a million miles away from. And it's a very issue, it's a big issue. How can you get ready for them to get the best out of them, but to attract them to your businesses? Not surprisingly, we asked people if they predict an increase or a decrease in traditional office real estate. And of course, there's a massive prediction that what we have today, the stock will not be demanded as it has in the past. Now, there's a lot of interesting innovation, and at the moment I'm researching the next book with Jeremy Myerson, my co-author. We're visiting great buildings all over the world, and I wanted to share two of my favourite recent buildings with you, because we are seeing companies grab all this and say, we understand it, what can we do differently? How can we change our organisation into a more agile, nimble and effective business and accommodate them in a different way? So Rabobank is fascinating for me. It's one of the big Dutch banks. And they were the owners of Interpolis, which you would have heard of us speak around in the mid-90s. They were the pioneers of new ways of working. They've now built themselves a new headquarters in Utrecht for 5,000 people, and they've taken all the ideas from Interpolis, supercharged them, and put them into this new headquarters. As you go into the main ground floor plaza, it's an incredible set of activity-based spaces, workspaces, meeting rooms, this amazing green structures, the espresso bar, birds' nests, even a meeting room here, cylindrical, made out of cardboard. Just wonderful, inspirational spaces. And the main tower for 5,000 people is split into houses, based on the Dutch house idea. Each house, same people, sharing a cluster or community, but within the house, activity-based work settings. Not a single person has his or her own office or desk. The other one, which I thought was fabulous, is Macquarie's new London office. Macquarie had been on stage here. We helped them and did the work in Sydney, which was an amazing activity-based working setting. they have taken some of the benefits from Sydney of interaction and collaboration and punched a hole through a brand new building in London, British Land, Ropemaker Place. They took out all the floors and they put in a staircase, which is astonishing, but it's all about people and interaction. And the chief exec is now proudly saying that that hole cost me £3,000 per person per year, just on the wasted space. But for them, that's the fundamental for the future. So that's the idea of value, people realizing value. I want to pass on to Kurt, who will talk about how we begin to monetize it and put a bottom line figure on this fairly fickle area of agility.
Thank you, Philip. I was fortunate enough to be at the Bern Summit, and it was a great opportunity because not only do we have a variety of people from our industry, but across every business sector as well. And it's quite incredible how creative people can be when they're surrounded by 650 hectares of vineyard, and of course the product of that as well, dare I suggest. And as you can imagine, those people were very opinionated and very differing views as well. But there were a number of things that everybody agreed on. The first one was that property is not working for us, and it's not working on a number of fronts. The first area in terms of property is not working for the organisation. If you think about it, it's inefficient, it's costly, it's fixed, and in many cases it's a millstone around the organisation's neck. No ability to move out of it. The second point was that it's not working for the workers. Too many workers are having to commute for too long a period of time to an office where, questionably, they actually need to work to collaborate. And thirdly, the environment. It's not working for the environment. We talk about commuting, and the number one contributor to pollution is the commute that we make each day. And I think there's something like, I may get the stat wrong, but something like 20 million journeys a day into London alone. So it had to change. Everybody in agreement, property has got to change. So let's look at one example that came up over the few days. This is company ABC. It is a real company, not one we've made up with. Let's just have a look at the headlines here. 1,500 employees. I'm sure all of you have got property like this. 50,000 square feet. Key point is a 15-year lease, very inflexible, tied in with only upward rent reviews every 5 years. So a significant cost to that organisation. If we have a look in terms of what happens in that building, there's really nothing unusual. Again, this is probably very similar to your own property. Yes, open plan offices, fixed offices, it's about 15% in communal circulation space. But what's really interesting here is they're told that they need to go to the office to collaborate, to work as a team, yet only 3% of the space is actually given up to collaboration space, meeting room space. Now, as we all know, it's probably booked for every hour of every day and probably used about 50%. Many organisations are like that. We now have a look at the office utilisation. Now, this organisation has made moves forward. They've adopted hot desking, and when you look at the figure there, it's actually 1.2 people per workstation, not 2 to 1, but 1.2 people. If you then consider that they've made that move, following the analysis of utilisation, we looked at almost half of the space was not being used. Now, that's about 600 people, so it's a bit like saying that I'm going to take an office for 25,000, 30,000 square feet, but actually we probably won't use it. Now, I don't know if your CEO is any different to mine, but I don't think we'd get that one through. So if you look at what is we call the agility dividend of agile working with this organisation, we've got it in dollars here, but it's probably around £4 to £6 million that they could save by moving in a more agile way. Now, someone much more academic than myself, by the name of Philip Ross, has managed to put the value of agile working into an equation. So let me just explain this one. It's in the books. You don't need to make notes on this one. There's 3 core parts to how you can actually monetize agility. The first part is the property portfolio, which we've talked about. It's the fixed and operational costs. Now, the second point, we're calling here the happiness dividend. But we're not measuring how many people are smiling and happy in their work. That's not essential. It's not a given. What we're measuring here is actually the commute time. So again, we talked about, 40 minutes, 20 million journeys. If you can save the commuting time, what research has proven that a lot of that time is actually given back to the employer. Now, I'm guilty, is the fact if I'm working in Manchester, I may leave at 4 or 5 o'clock to get back to London. But if I'm working near home, I'll probably be in the office to 6 to 7 o'clock in the evening. So the reality is you can actually put a value on saving commuting time. As an organisation, time and cost, you've got a value, you can measure it. The third point is around productivity. So in terms of productivity, people that do not have a long commute to work are different people in the work group. Higher energy, a higher productivity output. So if you then take A, B, and C, you have a value, divide it by the shares, you can even take this down to a value per share, a dividend. But why isn't everybody moving in this direction? Well, I think most people are moving in direction. I think I saw a stat saying only 8% of corporate organisations do not have an agile working strategy. But it's a journey. It's a long journey. This tells us really where we are today, and we run through that journey to a real total virtual world. But what the team said in Bern, there were a number of areas that held them back from actually implementing this. The first one was the human part of the equation, and that's actually getting the business unit buy-in. You know, we're talking about people here working virtually, and there's this maybe a little bit reluctance or a lot of reluctance in the culture. Well, if I can't see them, I can't manage them. So it's more about bringing that business unit along and actually managing by output. The second point was we can't measure it. We can't measure the value of agility. Well, we've seen that we can. And then the final point was in terms of lease ends. I'm tied into a lease end. I've got 10, 15 years to go. Well, maybe there's a way around that. Press the button and it should go forward. There you go. Okay. The way around it, let me share a couple of scenarios with you. Some of you may have heard me talk about Yale before. I make no apologies about talking about it again, and we'll add a 7-Eleven here in the US. Yale, everybody knows Yale. Everybody gets a yellow book. It's getting smaller, but it's still delivered to your house. Yale under significant cost pressure. Very, very competitive market. New players coming in all the time. Google, for example, they're changing their business very much now into web development and web hosting, but significant cost pressure. So they had to reduce their real estate cost. Not only that, in terms of their workforce, is a very transient workforce. So they move from city to city on sales campaigns. They have 20 offices located around the country, legacy real estate in the wrong place, utilisation down to 25 or 30%. So what they did in the UK was they closed all of their 18 locations over a month period, did some subleases, some leases came to the end, they took a hit on their balance sheet on other leases. But the benefit to them of moving into a virtual world was significant, not only in property costs, but also in the property gains, which I think was about 15%. We're a year on now since I first talked about this, and we're now rolling that out across the US, 100 locations and 2,500 people. Significant cost benefit. 7-Eleven, not driven by cost, although it's difficult to say that when you can see that there's $8 million saving there. Clearly, I should imagine cost was a consideration, but the number one priority for this was about being closer to the customer. The 7-Eleven team that they wanted to be close were retail managers, franchise managers. It was all about meeting people close to where they work. So the way that they use the Regis product is to have brief in and out meetings, and then they're on to their next location. So two organisations benefiting significantly from agility. When you look at 7-Eleven, an added part of this was we actually moved some of their existing real estate into the Regis portfolio. We run business centres from there, and actually they've got the ability to move back in if their situation changes. So real agility. Where do we get to in the future? everybody knows about Citrix, I guess, offering people to buy their own laptops. If we look at travel, I book my own travel now. I don't go through the corporate travel agency. I book my own flights, I book my own hotel. I always make a saving. So maybe we're getting to the world whereby actually we give people a sum of money to buy their own office. Are they not the best people to decide where they work? And actually, it's probably not an office. It might be somewhere for an hour. Could even be Starbucks if they needed a break. But we're moving towards that area. So summing up, people are moving forward. Organisations are doing this now. We did the research earlier this year. There'll be more research later on in 2013 as well. It's a journey we're all going along, but one thing is very clear, agility is an unstoppable journey. Thank you.
Okay, so some very interesting thoughts there from Philip and Kurt. From Philip about how we can adapt physical space to suit the needs of a virtual working world and help us to collaborate and innovate, and from Kurt and how we can measure the bottom line benefit for business. So in a minute we're just going to have a couple of questions for Kurt and Philip. I just want to remind you, if you're Twitter literate, feel free to tweet out any ideas that you hear that inspire you or you think you want to share with anyone else. So send out your tweets and use the hashtag #WorkTech. Okay, so we're going to take a couple of questions now quickly from the audience. If anybody has anything they want to ask Philip or Kurt, then feel free to step forward. There's a lady here in the middle.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hello.
You on?
Hi, Elizabeth Marsh from Internet Benchmarking Forum. I don't know if you've seen, there's an alternate version of this Microsoft vision of the future, which has a blue screen at the end. And I think it's, although just amusing, it's also kind of a point that just technology is messy. And, you know, this vision of the future I very much believe in, and the costs that can be saved from things like real estate. But the reality for a lot of companies is, I mean, we look at intranets and they're, you know, the state of intranets as one part of that digital workplace, one of the enablers, is often still underinvested. So I just wondering about, you know, the reality for organisations now, for a lot of organisations, and this future, and kind of how we bridge that gap in a way.
Okay, you want to answer that, Philip?
Yeah, it's a fundamental question. I think it's actually quite exciting for technology, because in the current climate, certainly investment in new technology is a challenge, and getting capital and budgets approved are very difficult. Whereas actually what you heard from Kurt, if you can save on an average building 6 million per annum, a lot of that can be invested in the technology you need to enable agile work. So what we find is when a company looks at this and takes this kind of holistic view, you know, the massive cost saving is in technology, but it needs a small budget. Part of that saving is reinvested in technology, which then achieves this objective of not getting the blue screen, of having the right infrastructure. And I must admit, the cloud is almost a no-brainer. I mean, if you look at the cost, I think Microsoft now charge £6 per person per month to provide everything from the cloud. I mean, you know, why would you put servers into buildings and employ an army of IT people to upgrade software when it's, you know, when it can be delivered from I mean, I think we're getting to that stage where it's an inflection. I think no one wouldn't do it. It's going to be a very obvious roadmap.
Okay, any other questions from the audience? Gentleman down here first, and we'll try and come to you if we've got time.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ronan from Cisco. Philip, maybe a question to you. If you fast forward 10 years from now, what would the urban landscape of a city look like? We're still seeing developments. We heard that the government is getting rid of a lot of properties. What is your vision for the future?
It's a key question. I mean, I think what we're looking at, and I think what will happen, is what I would call a polycentric city. You know, today it's predominantly based on this idea of a central business district. You know, the kind of the nucleus of the city is the heart, and people trying to get into it in the morning. I think that the vision I would have is that polyworking will become more and more the norm. And the challenge for the property world is to create the spaces in which that can happen effectively. Because I think today you struggle, by and large, to find great space to work in between home and your corporate office. There are offers, and we know about them, but not enough. And I think we'll find co-working growing. In the States, there's a huge co-working following with big players coming in, and so I think it'll be an exciting future. I think we'll find more work in the community. Maybe Steve can talk to that. I think more work on transport hubs, and exciting new clusters of people, and maybe a re-emergence of the idea of the guild. This idea of you cluster by your profession or something different.
Okay, thanks.
The only thing I would add to that also is in terms of looking at the Regis estate and how we've changing that estate currently to accommodate more of the virtual pop-in worker rather than having a fixed desk. So if you look at many of our locations whereby 5% of the space has been given up to business lounge, in many locations that's 15 to 20%. And I'm sure as that virtual world becomes a reality, you can see as much as 50% of the space being for the virtual worker.
I think what's exciting is, Mark Dixon has said that, I think in the States certainly you're doing this, that the next centres are going to be in shopping centres and local communities. Is that right? Not business districts. Yeah. So you'll see players coming in and building workplaces in unusual locations.
Okay, thanks, Philip. Well, let's quickly try and take a question from this gentleman here. We've got about a minute, so let's try and keep it short and sweet.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for that. Craig Knight, University of Exeter. It seems from the research that we do that what we have are two poles heading for a clash in some ways. You highlight, and you're right to highlight, we believe, the fact that we're moving to an increasingly flexible, movable, changeable workforce from the top end of the business perspective. But we're still at the bottom end of the position, if you like, that Paul Morell called the over-monitored, over-managed position of most office workers, in a place where people sit in highly controlled, very supervised spaces where they can't, for example, access Hotmail or Facebook or all of these facilities that most of us in this room take for granted. Now, those two things seem to be becoming increasingly into conflict. I'm just wondering, from the position that you have, how do you think those two things are going to come together, and what will be the fallout?
Okay, very quickly, Philip.
I mean, it's still, I find it remarkable going into corporates that ban, social networking, and what I find actually more and more is people just work around them. There's plenty of people now in corporate life carrying their own iPads, accessing corporate networks, and I was in a Canary Wharf organisation this week where the execs are using FaceTime off the corporate network. So there's kind of a bit of rebellious working going on, but that's happening more and more, and I think it's just IT security not keeping up. There's no particular reason that it shouldn't be allowed.
Okay, we're going to wrap this one up for now, but let's say thank you very much to Kurt and Philip.